Thanks, thank you. All right, let me make sure my mute is off here. All right, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
A little bit, kind of? Okay. Yes. Well, first, thank you guys for coming. So we just had this idea 3 days ago, which is why it was we so urgently got the word out. But thank you for coming. I was hoping somebody would show up, because if not, I'd just be out there shopping. But it is such an honor to be here at B&H Photos. It's not just the greatest store on earth, but it's the greatest people behind it. So it is truly an honor to be here with you guys today. So what I wanted to do was talk about Photoshop for travel photography. Now, the cool thing about travel photography is that even if you don't consider yourself a travel photographer, you probably take vacation. At that moment, you become a travel photographer. So that's the cool thing about it. Regardless of what we're really into the rest of our lives, when we go on vacation, all of a sudden, now we're concerned about making great travel photos. So what I'm going to do today is take you through the techniques that I use myself for my travel photography. It's one of my passions. If I had to pick the things that I'm into, it's sports, portraiture, and travel. And so it's one of the things I love to do. So I spend a lot of time working on the post-processing stuff, and I'm going to show you the same things I do in my own workflow. I'm going to take you through a whole bunch of different things, because what I want to do today is give you like an arsenal of different things, because in travel, because of the very nature of it, it's so much different than like landscape. Landscape's a very pre-prepared thing. We get up at dawn and we set up our tripod and all these things happen, and all we have to hope is that we get good weather. But with travel, you never know what's literally going to be around the next corner, so you're going to have to just deal with whatever situations, whatever lighting, whatever camera shake, or whatever we're going to have to deal with through the whole thing. So that's kind of where I've taken this from. I'm going to start with a really short slideshow. The slideshow is about like 2.5 minutes, but when I take a trip, one of my own personal things that I love to do is I always make a photo book from each trip. So right after, I usually do it on the plane home. And so I just got back from France last week, and when I landed in Atlanta, I already had my book done. And it's one of the things I love to do on a long flight, because I think the photo book process actually extends your creativity. Because there's an art to putting together a photo book that looks good together, where you have 2 images side by side, maybe 3 images on a 2-page spread, and getting them to look good together, it can be as much fun as the shooting and the processing and everything else. So by adding a photo book to the end of it, you get to have this extra experience. Now, so the slideshow I'm going to show you are screen captures of my photo books. So let me go ahead and do that. I'll have to work with the audio level here. It might not be right on the money, but let me just launch it here real quick. And I don't need Safari open probably. One more time, launching QuickTime. And then now it's my email, probably don't need that open. And back to QuickTime. Photo Mechanic 5, probably don't need that open, back to QuickTime. You gotta love this, the way it just randomly chooses applications for you instead of the one you really want. All right, here we go. I think this is the one. And we'll go full screen, and we'll turn the audio up, and see how that. Thanks. Thank you. Well, one of the reasons why I wanted to show you the slideshow was because we're going to actually take some of those photos that were in the slideshow and build them from scratch. Now, here's the thing I need you to help me out with, because you just saw the slideshow, and you're about to see some of the photos before they were ready to be in a slideshow, raw out of the camera. Need you to take a moment, please. Raise your right hand. Repeat after me. I promise not to think less of Scott as a photographer when I see the crap he actually shoots. All right. Okay. So that being said, let me find my pen and we'll start from scratch. Now the first one I'm going to show you is just, you know, a lot of times you're out taking shots. The shots can kind of look like snapshots, especially if they're friends or family and stuff. So there's a little trick that I use. It's a lighting trick that we do after the fact that kind of helps the situation. So here's one I just took of my buddy the other day. So I did a photo walk in Paris. My wife took me there on vacation. And while I was there, I went ahead and did a photo walk since I was there so I could write it off. Anyway, so this is my buddy Serge, who lives in Paris, and he's a very good photographer, Parisian photographer. And so the trick is incredibly simple. It's like a 3-step process, but you can add one little extra step if you want. You start off by duplicating the layer. Just duplicate the background layer, and you're going to change the blend mode to multiply. Now, I want to just give you just a 60-second tutorial on blend modes, right? Because there's all these different blend modes. Blend modes determine how the layer you're on interacts with the layers below it, right? In normal, it doesn't interact at all. It just covers whatever's there. But all the rest of them somehow interact. The problem is the only person who understands them is Stephen Hawking. But the good news is you only really need to know 4 of these. If you learn 4 of these, right, you'll be able to do so many things, not just here in travel photography, but in Photoshop in general. Because there are special effects ones that we use once in a while, but there's 4 we use all the time. So I'm going to go through those 4 with you, and they're very, very simple to remember. All right, the first one is multiply. All right, so multiply makes things darker. If you forget, look at the word right above it. It darkens. That's it. So multiply, if you forget what it does, it darkens. The next one is screen. It makes things lighter. And if you forget what it does, look at the word right above it. Lighten. So multiply makes whatever your image is that much darker. Screen makes it way brighter. There's 2 more. Soft light. Soft light adds contrast. And the 4th one is overlay. It adds, ready, more contrast. So that's it. Darker, lighter, some contrast, more contrast. If you know those 4, the rest you'll just use for like a special effect or something. I use one later, I think. But it's like you don't use those hardly ever, but these are going to use a lot. So for this one, I'm going to use multiply to make things darker. Now he gets a little bit too dark there. So I'm just going to, so step 1, I'll start, now that I've given that description, start over. Step 1 is duplicate the layer and switch it to multiply mode. Step 2 is click on the layer mask icon, just click on it. What you're going to do is get the brush tool set to black, because if your layer mask is in white, you paint in the opposite color, black. We're going to make it really, really big. All right, like this. And then all you do is just click. And you're done. Now, if you duplicate this layer, it makes it even more dramatic. To where it looks like you lit it with a flash. You had some lighting source, because here's before, and 10 seconds later, here's that. And it just helps to focus your eye, because your eye's going to look at the brightest thing in the photo, right? Let me give you another example, and we'll do it again. So here's not my friend Serge. And it's taken out on the street. So duplicate the layer, change the blend mode to multiply, click on the layer mask, and then just go bang, and it relights it. And look at the difference. And it kind of helps take away some of the snapshottiness to it, because now you're focusing the light. If you don't think it's dramatic enough, duplicate the layer one more time. And there it is. Look at the difference from here to there. I'll give you one more example and we'll roll on. But since it takes 15 seconds, it's not a big deal. All right, so this is, whoops, I just did something crazy. This is my buddy Jim there with the blue vest on. And our tour guide. Duplicate the layer, go to multiply mode, add a layer mask, and click. And it just lights them. Now that might be a little big because it lights their whole body and everything. I would make this probably a little smaller and just light them. Just one click with the mouse, and then duplicate it one more time and look at the difference. So it's a really good one. I use this one a tremendous amount because you have no control over the light outside. The light's what it is. But so your eye's going to go wherever it wants to go. But if you can make people look where you want them to look, it makes for much more impactful photos.
How hard's your brush?
It's just a soft, regular, standard soft brush. There's no hardness at all. It's whatever the 100% soft brush. I work with a soft brush, 100% soft, 99.9% of the time. I do not use pressure sensitivity on my tablet. So I am using a Wacom tablet. This is the Wacom tablet small. This is the one that I use. There's nothing I'm going to do today that requires you to have a tablet, but if you have a tablet, it will change your life in ways that no one can even describe. This one actually fits. I like the small because it fits perfectly in my laptop bag. I just slide it right in the back, goes with me, and the dream is that I'm on a flight with the seat next to me empty, and I put down the table, the little tray table on the side, and I retouch in a seat in the sky. Okay, so let's actually put it right side up. But the tablets are wonderful. They're especially for retouching and things like this. But in this case, I would just take my mouse and click. I haven't done anything with this to really experience the joy of a tablet. Next, we're going to look at editing in Camera Raw. I do most of my editing in Camera Raw, not in Photoshop. The good news is you do not have to shoot in RAW to use Camera Raw. Camera Raw will open up TIFFs, it'll open up PSDs, it'll open up JPEGs, and of course it'll open up RAWs as well. So it doesn't really matter what format you use, you can open it up in Camera Raw. So why did I stop using curves and why did I stop using levels? Well, the main reason is this. And let me pull this down for a second. Hi. So there was a program years ago called, it's on the tip of my tongue, it was from France, it was $4,000. It was called Light something. The name escapes me. At any other time, I'd be able to tell you, but put 100 people in front of me, I have no idea what it's called. Okay, so anyway, I remember doing an interview, and they asked me, what would you hope for the future of Photoshop? And I said, well, there's this program from France named, and what its claim to fame was this. You could open up a really high resolution image, right? You could open it up in this program, and you could make edits, right? And it would really open up a proxy. It opened up a low-res version. So you could work at full speed the whole time. You could just make as many changes as you want, and you could go back and undo any change. You could go back 10 changes, 20 changes, whatever you wanted to do. But you never, ever, ever saw the status bar. You know, the little status bar that says, please wait while I'm applying this filter or anything? You know. So, and that was, to me, that was the dream. And I said, I dream that one day Photoshop will work like that. What I just described is Camera Raw today. You work full speed, right? There's no hesitation. It's as if you're working on a low-res file. It keeps track of every single change that you made so you can undo it, and you never ever see a status bar. And just like that program from France, I can't remember the name of it, is at the very last, at the very end, you click OK, and it applies all the changes at once. That's exactly the way that program worked. It was $4,000, but now it's Camera Raw. The other thing I like about Camera Raw is it was made for photographers. It makes sense to us, right? So you'll see me, I'm going to take you through some edits all in Camera Raw. Occasionally I'll jump over to Photoshop to do a little thing that I can't do in Camera Raw, but Adobe keeps putting so much power in Camera Raw. If you look at where Adobe is expanding, like their new things for photographers, most of it is in Camera Raw. They'll add a filter here or something there, but for photographers, most of their stuff is there. Now, if you use Lightroom, Camera Raw is built right into Lightroom. It is the develop module, so you don't have to worry about like, oh, I don't have Camera Raw. If you have Lightroom, you still have Camera Raw. Let's open up a shot. Oh, actually, I'm going to use the mini bridge here. Let's open this one. And the thing that kind of drives us nuts, I think, in many ways about editing our photos is how much different our eyes are and how much different what we see through a viewfinder is versus what we find up later in Photoshop. Here's one big problem. You're going to see this a lot in this class. When you shoot in RAW versus JPEG, I don't know if anybody's told you this because it's kind of controversial, but your images look better if you shoot in JPEG, right? Here's why. When you switch your camera to shoot JPEG, your camera sharpens the photo, it adds contrast, it adds color correction, it adds all these things to the photo, including noise reduction, and I mentioned sharpening. It does all these things to make a final image, right? So when you switch your camera to RAW, you're telling your camera, turn off the sharpening, turn off the color correction, turn off the contrast, turn off the noise reduction, turn off anything that you do to make this photo look good, and give me the raw, untouched photo. I'll add the sharpening, the contrast, the color and stuff in Camera Raw or whatever you use. The problem with that is, and where you get really burned, is when you switch your camera to shoot in RAW, it still shows you the JPEG preview on the back of your camera. So you're shooting and you think, man, this looks great. Look how vivid the colors are, right? Then you open it up in Photoshop and you're like, oh, what happened? All right, and then so your eye also works against you. So here I'm standing at this blue mosque, and it was such a beautiful night. I kept talking to my wife, wow, this is incredibly beautiful. And then I open the shot and it looks like that. I'm like, that's not what I saw. But when I'm taking it, I'm looking at the JPEG and it looks good. Part of the problem is your eye. So our eyes are so incredible. I can stand there at the Blue Mosque and I can look at it and I see tons of detail. It's fully lit just fine for me. I pick up a single lens reflex camera like a DSLR, it still looks good looking through the viewfinder. But then once you press the shutter button, now all the limitations of your camera get shoved into that photo and you wind up with this awful thing. So it is our job to make it look as good as the JPEG would, or look as good as it did in person. If it looks a little better than it did in person, I'm okay with that. And I think that will be our goal today, is to make it look a little better. All right, so one of the things I do is I don't worry about getting correct white balance, right? So I could have like put a gray card in here, right? We joked about the walls being 18% gray. I could have put a gray card in here and really nailed the exact approximate white balance. That's great if you're doing product photography. But the rest of this is a creative choice, right? So I get to choose how I want the sky to be. Do I want it to be a dawn sky? Do I want it to be a sunset sky? I get to make that choice. So in this case, I'm going to choose to make it just a beautiful, beautiful sky. I'm going to move the tint slider over here, over to a color you don't get to see every day. But I mean, you do see this depending on the sunset, depending on what the clouds are in the sky and the lighting. And I can make it either more yellow, kind of almost a pinkish, which you see very often as well, or I can go the opposite direction and make it look more purpley. But the thing is which one of these is right? The one you choose. There is no international committee for white balance that determines that, no, that sky wasn't that color that night. So you get to choose where you want it. So I'm just going to, this is kind of the setup I'm going to use. Now, next is the image here. Let me look at it on screen here. Yeah, it's so dark. And when I'm standing there, I see all the detail, but of course it's gone here. Well, the shadow slider does a pretty nice job with that. I'm going to raise the shadow amount, and you start to see the detail come back. Now, in older versions of Lightroom or in older versions of Photoshop, you see how far I'm dragging that? If I did that in Lightroom 3 or in Camera Raw 6, right, the old version of Camera Raw, it would start to look kind of fake, almost like HDR, right? It gets that look, it gets that kind of milky look or something weird. So they completely redid the math in CS6, and the math is tremendously better. And this is one of the places where they really increased it. They redid how the shadows works, so you can actually open it up and it doesn't look funky. Now you can make a case for whichever. I like the way it looks on this screen better than it does on that one, but still, you can make a case for how far to drag it, but the good thing is you can drag it as far as you want. Watch, if I go to 100%, it doesn't look bad, it doesn't look weird, it doesn't get crazy or anything. It's just brighter than I think it should be, but it doesn't look weird, and that's the important part. So I'm going to kick this down a little bit, all right? And I just want to give you 30 seconds on these 6 sliders. I think of the first 2 sliders as controlling the overall, like, exposure of the photo. So the exposure slider, right, the overall brightness or the overall darkness of the photo. So that's exposure. And in this case, I think I'd probably like it underexposed by just a tad. The contrast slider, for the first time ever, actually works. I don't know if you ever tried it in the old version. You drag it back and forth and go, is this connected to anything? It's just like nothing happened. And so luckily, it actually adds contrast now. So I can boost the contrast a little, and it looks a little more contrasty. Highlights. So highlights for how I'm going to use it here. There's not much highlights in this photo, but the highlights I'm going to use here are going to be to actually pull back the sky. I do this a lot. You ever notice how the sky gets so overly bright sometimes, right? Well, by crunching down the highlights, especially on a bright sunny day, you'll see me do later, does an amazing job to bring back detail in clouds and in the sky. So watch when I drag the highlights the opposite direction. You couldn't even do this in Lightroom 3 or older Photoshop, but look how it clamps down the color. All right? So the top two are for your exposure. The next two, highlights and shadows, are for problems. You won't even have to go to these two unless you have a problem. I have a problem. I got a backlit subject, so I have to kind of work with it. Whites and blacks, fine-tuning the photo. You want to increase the whites a little bit, but I just kind of clamp down the sky. There's no sense in bringing it all back. But this puppy here, clarity. I love this on a level I can't believe. Clarity, I think to use clarity when you want to bring more detail into the shot, right? If you want more detail, if you want detail to come out. So texture, buildings, steel, metal, anything, you wouldn't want it to use it on like a puppy, you know, or bunny, or you know, or baby. You don't want texture, you know. But it's wonderful for the right stuff. So if you want to enhance detail, watch what clarity does. Look at the detail it brings out. Now, the thing about this was in other older Photoshop, if you raised it up high, it was just a disaster. It was a mess. You can go a lot higher with it depending on the photo before you get all kinds of weird looks with it. But they redid the math here as well. All right. Vibrance down here it's an interesting slider because saturation's horrible. Saturation just makes everything look really clowny and stupid, right? But vibrance is really brilliant. I'll explain what it does, but you have to let it marinate a second. So vibrance takes colors in the photo that are already pretty vibrant, and it doesn't do much to them. But if it finds dull colors, it boosts them a lot. So already vibrant doesn't do much. Dull, it does quite a bit. And if there's flesh tones in there, if there's any flesh tones at all, it actually has a special mathematical algorithm to avoid flesh tones. All in one slider. There's no way you can tell me the engineer that wrote that has ever had a date. Because you can't do crazy math like that and then go to dinner and a movie. I mean, that's insane math in one slider. So if I wanted to add a little more vibrant, I probably won't, but I would just drag this to the right a little bit. And you can see the whole thing gets a little more vibrant. A little bit, it doesn't hurt. I know a guy that sells stock photography, and every photo, no matter what, he applies a preset that gives plus 12 vibrance. You know what his main comment he hears on his photos is? Your stuff is so colorful. This adds vibrance to everything. All right, so this would get me started. I did most of what I did here, but there's a couple of things that I really can't do here. See these wires? I know that they're necessary, but not in my photo. They may be necessary in real life. See how the bird is smeared and stuff here? So I need to do a little bit of work. So this is where I have to jump over to Photoshop. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. We're going to jump over to Photoshop. I'll show you how to get rid of wires and junk like this because there's a nice technique for it. We're going to use the spot healing brush, which is great for this. But the spot healing brush has an Achilles heel, and that is it doesn't like to touch anything. So if where this wire hits the dome, right, of the mosque, it's going to smear. It's going to look like you took your finger and smeared paint. It just looks very smeared. So the trick to using this for stuff like this is to make a break in the wire. So you're not going to use the healing brush first. You're going to use the rubber stamp tool. And what we're going to do is we're going to put a break in the wire. So I'm going to go Option click here on Mac, on PC would be Alt click, and I'm sample that piece of sky. And I'm just going to put a break in the wire right there, just a little break. Then I go up here and do the same thing. Option click, and just put a little break in the wire. All right, so there's a break. Now what you can do is take the spot healing brush, click it once, hold the Shift key, click again, and the wire's gone. So by doing that little bit, by putting a break in whatever it is you want to remove, because I shot that famous church in Spain, La Sagrada Familia, the church that will never ever be completed. There's always cranes around it. There will be cranes around it when we're all just dust. But you don't want to see these cranes when you take a picture of the church because nothing looks worse and all. And I used it to get rid of those cranes just like that. But I had to break the crane, had to put a little hole through it first at the bottom, and then basically you have to make whatever you want to remove an island. It can't be touching anything. Now, you're going to have this little fix job here on the edge of your dome. So here's the trick to get rid of that. When you go to the rubber stamp tool, it will show you a preview of what you're about to clone. So this is what you do. You go in here with a small brush, you're going to option click right on this edge, right there, right on the edge of the dome. I try to get it right on the money where the little circle hits the middle. And then see how it shows a preview of what I'm going to paint? You take that little preview and you line it up right over where the line was and just click. And it's gone. And then I can get rid of this junk fairly easy, right? And just make a little fix. So now I got to go to the other side of the building and say, hey, nice sensor dust cleaning. Time to clean the sensor perhaps? I think maybe. All right, we'll fix those. Let's, boom, get rid of that. Boom. So I'm just tapping, one tap. You make the brush a little bigger than the problem, and then you just tap once. Now, let me back off, because there's some, oh, look at this sensor dust. This is lovely. Nice job. All right. Oh, and there's, okay, now look, there's some more stuff over here, this little sucker. So let's get rid of that. Get rid of this, get rid of that, and actually see how it's smeared on the edge here? I was careless. Let's just do that little trick I just showed you. Click on the edge, you get the preview in there, move that preview down to where you were, and just click. And then I moved a little right before it, nice. But now you can use the healing brush to get rid of that stuff. And you just click once, hold the shift key, and click again, and it's gone. All right, now, what about the birds? So the birds, you can use the spot healing brush. Goodbye. If it doesn't really look like a bird, then it looks like sensor dust, so you gotta get rid of it. The only thing that I wish was it would make like a sound like, you could like a sound, little sound effects to it. Look at this. And anybody else flying? All right. And again, you would do the same thing to get rid of these. I'm not gonna get rid of every one of them because we'd be here like for another 10 minutes on this stupid project. But break it, go up here, break it, and then spot healing brush. Make it small. 1, 2, 3. All right. Now, hey, good news. Apparently you don't really have to take notes today because they are filming this and you're going to put this on YouTube, right? It's going to go on YouTube. So if you can go back and watch it. So you're like, if you're like furiously taking notes, you can go, hey, I'll go back and watch it tomorrow. Okay. All right. So now I don't want you to think for one moment that you could have stayed home and watched this tomorrow. Don't think that, because then we didn't get to have this. I'm not sure what this is, but it was worth coming all the way to downtown New York. Okay, well, there's ancillary things that happen outside this room that may be much better than what we're doing in here. All right, next, I want to show you another one. And this is cringe time. This was in that slideshow. I don't know if you remember seeing this, but that's the after photo. Here's the before. Ah, I know. But I can tell you, I was on that bridge and I remember I got to shoot this dome because it looked so beautiful that night. But this is what I got, right? It didn't look this bad. It didn't look as good as what you just saw. It was in that gray area somewhere between. So I'll just kind of take you through what I would do to get to that spot that we were just at. First thing is I think it's literally overexposed. I just think it's just too darn bright. So I'm going to bring it down a bit, maybe somewhere like this. Something in there, just to at least not so it's not so punchy. And okay, that looks right. All right. Next, I'm going to change the temperature. All right, the two sliders, I get to choose my own white balance. I don't have to accept the one that the camera had, which was the most likely that night. Auto white balance is probably where I had it. And let's increase this way up. And tint somewhere in here. Something like that. It still needs a lot of work. Now, one of the things that I've put in my mind, and I hope you'll remember this, is when I see a photo that's washed out, I know exactly what slider to grab. The black slider. 9 times out of 10, if you grab the black slider and drag it to the left, it's going to fix your washed out photo problem. So I'm going to drag it to the left, and it brings back the basically what was lost in the shadows, right? So it brings back that, and I went pretty far with it, but I think it needed it. All right, now, I'm also going to do something I do quite a bit, which is to darken the edges all the way around the photograph. Now, there is the little FX panel, right, has a grain slider that we don't use very often. But right under here, there's this thing called post-crop vignetting. The idea is that you can darken the edges of your photo, But if you crop the photo, the vignetting would automatically adjust it in. But I use it always anyway, even though over in the lens one there is vignetting there. The quality of this lens vignetting is not nearly as good as the quality of the one here. So if you drag it to the left, it darkens the edges all the way around. Look how it kind of starts to create a glow around the dome, right? So we're just darkening the edges a bit. So the amount slider controls how much how dark the edges are, and then the mid-tone controls how far it extends in. I'm going to leave the, excuse me, the midpoint controls that, but I'm going to darken the edges a decent amount. Alrighty, next I'm going to open this image in Photoshop. But look where we started. Well, actually, to see where we started, you have to go all the way over to here. There's no way for us to see where we started. This is the stupidest thing about Camera Raw in the world. But, well, I guess I could do this. Here we go. You could go to Camera Raw Defaults and then go to Custom Settings. All right, so here's where we started. And here's where we are now. Somewhat better. Okay, let's open it up, and we're going to just tweak it just a tiny bit to finish it off. Next, we're going to, ready? And you already learned this trick. Duplicate the layer. Go to multiply mode. We're going to hit the, remember the very first thing we learned? We're going to make this brush huge, and we're going to paint one click over our subject, right there. But not with a hard brush, or it looks like Lion King. Hold on. That was actually the healing brush. The dome was about to go away. So let's just, there we go. I tapped it 3 times to kind of help the light there. Lastly, I'm going to cheat. I'm going to flatten the image. And what I want to do is I want to increase the color inside those little windows, right? So let's just duplicate the layer. Let's go to screen mode, right? That makes everything brighter. We learned multiply makes it darker, screen makes it brighter. All right, so there it is. But of course it made the whole photo real bright now. So I want to hide this. I want to hide this brighter version behind a mask. That way I can just paint in bright where I want it. So I Option click. Instead of just clicking the layer mask, you hold the Option key on Mac or the Alt key on PC, click on it, and it hides that behind a black mask. Now, remember what I said, you paint the opposite color. If it's black, you're going to paint in white, hopefully with a smaller brush. I'm changing brush sizes, by the way, using the bracket keys on my keyboard. If you have a tablet, there's actually a circle. You can just circle your finger around to change brush sizes, or you can just use the bracket keys. The bracket keys on your keyboard are to the right of the letter P. All right, so I'm going to go in here and just make sure I'm painting in white and turn the lights on in this part of the church. There we go. And whoops, a little bit too much there. Make the brush a little smaller. I don't know if I even really need to paint that part, but there we go. So look at the difference. It kind of just turns that on. And that was the image that was in the slideshow, which I'm not proud of. Okay, let's just close that as quickly as we can so you don't dwell too long on what really just happened. And let's look at another thing you're going to run into a lot with travel photography, and that is lens issues. Now we're going to take this a little further than just a lens issue. But take a look at this shot of Shanghai. So a couple of problems is, number one, I don't remember if the buildings were really going to fall over like that. See how they're all kind of leaning in, but that's typical for a very wide angle lens. So this was shot with a 14-24, and I was probably at, looks like what, 24 millimeter? And you're going to get this when you shoot with wide angle. So we can fix that, but we can do a lot of things to make this photo better. Overall, it just kind of looks bleh. So, and it was late in the day. You can see kind of from where the sun is hitting the buildings. This was much, much later in the day. So I could make it warmer just by dragging the temperature slider over this way. I could make it later in the day by just lowering the exposure a bit too. But there are a couple things that I want to do. The whole image looks very, very flat. Now it's somewhat polluted there. So that was something we had to deal with every day. So you can kind of often cut through fog or things like that just simply by adding contrast. So I'm going to crank up the contrast a little bit to help. All right. The highlights. Watch the difference. There's what it does to the sky. It clamps it down. But in this case, I might want to actually crank up the highlights a little bit just to make it a little bit brighter. It's kind of dark within these buildings. Let's just make it open up the shadows. helped a little bit. How about the whites? Is it too much? Nah, it just blows out everything. It's not really washed out here, but you know what this really could use? I want to bring out texture and detail. I go to clarity. Now, let's just see what we've done so far. All right, it's going in the right direction, and we really haven't done very much to it. But there's a couple of problems. Number one is it's still really dark where the buildings are. In that area where the building is just really, really dark. So what I want to do is I want to be able to just edit just that area where the buildings are. So everything that we've done in Camera Raw so far has been, I move a slider, it changes the whole photo. But in this case, we're going to go and grab this brush. The adjustment brush kind of gives you the same controls, but you can paint where you want it. So if I want things to be brighter in the buildings, I'll just go over here to exposure, and these sliders can be all over the place. If you want to zero them all out, just click a plus or a minus beside whichever slider you want to use. I'm going to make it brighter, so I'll click the plus sign. Watch all the sliders instantly reset. So now what I'm going to do, and this is an interesting thing about the adjustment brush. The adjustment brush works really weird. You have to guess your starting number. You just pick any random number to start, then you paint over what you want, and then you go back and choose the right number. I know it sounds weird, but it'll make sense in a second. So watch, I increase the exposure. I'm going to paint over these buildings a bit. Oh, that's probably too big a brush. Let me just undo that. Let me make a smaller brush. And we'll just, not that small. We'll just paint over the buildings a bit. And it looks way, way too bright, but that's okay. I'm just going to do this kind of quickly. You would take more care than this unless you were drunk. And if you mess up, you can hit the Option key and just say, whoops, I didn't mean to paint over those. It's kind of the take away button there. All right. Now, it looks ridiculous, really. It's way too bright and stuff. Well, that's good. You can go in here to the exposure and say, no, I had to pick a random number. I'm okay. Now I'm going to pick the number I actually want, which is maybe that. I can open up more shadows. I can add more clarity on top of that. So look what just you're able to do right there. Now, of course, I have to fix this as well. This is a little too dark, and I would do a better job than just painting it real quick like that, but, and then maybe we'll paint in some of this a little brighter. And again, I'm doing it really quickly. You'll take more care, I'm certain. If not, you get fired. All right, so look what we just did just by painting in particular areas there. We made it a little better, but I think we can take this a lot further still. Our biggest problem is the buildings are leaning in. So there's actually a tab for this. If you go down here, there's a lens correction tab. The first thing I recommend is try the default built-in lens corrections. Just turn it on and see if it helps. Well, here's what it really fixed. It didn't do much for our problem, but it did get rid of the darkening in the edges. There are 4 dark edges. The vignetting along the outside edges, that's the vignetting you don't want. It did fix that. So I guess it was a step in the right direction. But most of the time I find you're going to have to go to the manual tab over here. Now the manual tab adds to whatever you just did in lens corrections. So it adds on top of that. But watch what you can do here. You can grab this slider and you can tip it left or right, or you can tip it back like this and straighten the buildings. So now the buildings are up straight. All right, look at the difference. Remember they were leaning in, they're all going to fall over, and now they're straight. But to do that, you had to kind of make the buildings a little squashed, right? A little squatty. So when you click to open the photo, you've got this gray thing. You could just crop it and it would go away, but your buildings are a little squished. So what I do is this. I select this whole thing down to this bottom, go to free transform, and then just pull it down a bit to stretch it back out, so the buildings don't look squatty anymore. I don't usually have to pull all the way to the bottom, it just depends on the photo. I pull it until it looks right. And now I'm going to recrop the image. We'll just go choose, since you already have a selection there, crop. Now, I remember that in Shanghai it was a pretty day, but I don't remember there being 2 giant gray triangles. So what you could do for those, perhaps, and we're going to have to see, let me clear out my crop here. Let's just go to original size. Here we go. Let's do this. Let's go to the tragic wand. I'm going to select this area in here. I'm going to select this area in here. So these are the 2 areas that we don't want. Now I could crop the photo down to where those are just gone. That would be easy enough. And there's not a lot of exciting stuff on the edges. But I always think it's fun to try content aware fill. So We'll see how it works. It can either be brilliant or just a miserable disaster. But I can tell you one thing that will help it. Once your selection's in place, have your selection grow by about 4 pixels, right? Just have it grow out a little bit. So we'll go select, modify, and expand. So we're going to take the selection that's there, expand it out 4 pixels. We hit 4, okay, and then we're going to go to fill. And our choice for fill is not white, not black, it's content aware. Click OK, cross your fingers, and in some cases it looks okay, and in some cases it adds another building. That's the thing about content aware. Sometimes it's wonderful, sometimes it's this. Now, luckily it did okay down here. It filled in some other stuff. You would have to work on this area, and that's easy enough. We could go to over here, get the rubber stamp tool, and just continue this building over. Just continue this over and go down. You can fix it easy enough, but at least it did some of the work. So at least if it doesn't do all the work, at least sometimes it does at least a decent amount of it. And then you can carry the dock down a little further using that trick I showed you where well, that was pretty bad, right? There you go. Carry the dock down. You can get pretty darn close fairly quick without really breaking your back. Okay, I'm not sure if that building really extends there, but either way, we're not done yet. So what I would do next, now if it were me, and it is, I would select this area, the whole city, and press Command J, so just it is up on its own layer. So I have a copy of it up on top. Now, close your eyes for just a moment. I'll tell you when to open. Go into Free Transform, and choose Flip Vertical. Don't look yet. Don't look. Now you can look. Now, the mirror is too obvious. So I'm going to give you some things to hide the fact that you just cheated like mad. So here's what you're going to do. First thing is, I always make the reflection darker. Just make it darker. Any way you know how. You can use multiply, you can use levels, you can just go to levels, drag the midtone slider over, it's darker. That's number 1. Number 2 is, I then go and I go filter, blur, motion blur, and I add a little bit of motion blur in the direction of the buildings. So go to motion blur and add a little bit of blur like that. So look at the difference, watch. No blur, blur. Then lastly, this is the one that sells it. Go to your opacity and lower it a little bit so some of the real water shows through. So that way you kind of get that. It looks better than the garbage we had there, because the water that was there before was, but now we have this. Now, there are some other things that need to be done, and I'm not going to do them all, but I can tell you one is, and this is driving me nuts, I don't know if you've even noticed it, but this building, although it's straight, it's kind of, you know what I mean? It's like tilted a little to the, so look at the ball, right? It's like, it looks okay down here, and then it starts to like almost lean. It's like the building, instead of being straight, is kind of like this. So you can fix that, believe it or not. Go and make a selection, right? And then press Command J to put it up on its own layer so you have just that. Then if you go to Free Transform, you can use Skew, or you can just kind of watch. Just pull it up a little, like that. Now, you can see a little tiny edge there, so you just go to Layer Mask, get a nice soft brush, and just mask that away in just a couple of seconds. There you go. So look at your building. See, it did look funky, didn't it? Now it's dancing. But so, I mean, there are a lot of things you could add contrast, you could do a whole bunch of more things, but I just kind of wanted to introduce you to the idea of just cheating like mad. There is one other thing I would do since we're doing this. Now, I don't do this for landscape photography. I mean, for travel photography, I only do it for landscape photography. If I'm doing landscape photography, I travel with a neutral density gradient filter, right? Because when you're out shooting landscapes, you know, we talked about your camera doesn't always see what your eye sees. So what I'm concerned about is when I'm shooting a landscape, either the ground is going to be exposed correctly and the sky is going to be too light, which is generally what we do, or the sky is going to look great and the ground's going to be black. So you take this glass filter that they sell here at B&H Photo in New York City. You get this glass filter. Tiffin makes these too. You can get round ones or square ones. You put it in front of your camera, and it's a gradient. It's dark at the top, and then it goes to transparent. So when you put that in front of your scene, it makes the sky dark as you take the photo. That's the real way to do it. But if you don't have one of those, I don't ever carry one when I'm doing travel photography, because I go really, really light. I use one camera body and one lens almost exclusively for travel photography. I take a full frame body and a 28-300 lens, and I put it on there and I enjoy my trip. I've done the thing where you carry tons of camera bags and you're switching lenses all the time and stuff, and your family hates you and all that. And now I just, one body, one lens, it's a great time. But you can replicate that effect really, really nicely in Photoshop. All you do is this: make sure black and white are your foreground colors. Go to the little pop-up menu over here and choose gradient. And it brings up a gradient that's exactly the opposite of what you need. The ground is dark and the sky is transparent. Luckily, there's a button called reverse that makes the sky dark and then that. Now, you're going to click OK and it looks terrible, but you can choose blend modes. You want one that adds a little contrast, like soft light or overlay, and it makes it very, very dark. Here's the thing. There is a special gradient in CS6 that is designed for neutral density. It's called the neutral density gradient. It's the very last one in the bench right here. It's called neutral density, and it makes it more realistic, like a real neutral density filter would be. Also, this filter goes from top and it graduates perfectly down to the bottom. But generally, if you see landscape photos, it's more darkened up top. You can control that by clicking on the gradient, and this little white slider controls how far down your gradient goes. It should be more like that. So now you can see how it darkens the sky like that. So that's the equivalent of adding a neutral density gradient, except for you get to decide after the fact how dark it is, how far down it goes. You have a lot more control than you actually would the other way. So that's how I would fix that one up. And actually, I think, now that I'm looking at it, I don't really like the color, but in this case, you could go back and choose a photo filter. So there's photo filters. You could choose maybe a red to add something in there, maybe a little more red. Yeah, it was a red night. I'll never forget it. Okay, but you get the idea. You can just kind of offset it. It looked just a little too cool. You can add a red, or of course, you know, like an 81A kind of. It doesn't say 81A, but it is. There we go. And add a little more yellow to it if you like. All right, we got a couple more because we only have, believe it or not, we only have 11 minutes left. I know it. Where does the time go, right? All right. Oh, this is a good one. This is an important one. I don't think anything ruins a beautiful, like, shot of a temple or a shot of than tourists. Tourists, and so there's a technique that if you have a little bit of patience and Photoshop can really make it work for you. So for example, I'm going to grab these two shots of the Great Wall. I was taken on the ugliest day at the Great Wall ever. But you know, with travel photography, most of the travel photography I do is literally from a tour bus. Like the bus stops, you get out and you take a shot, or they say, okay, we have 20 minutes to see this temple, and you get what you get. Because I'm usually, I don't have the luxury, and I think we're probably all in this together. Like every once in a while I'll run to a photographer who flies to an exotic place and they're there for 2 weeks and all. That's not me. I'm with my kids, with my wife. It's a family vacation. I can't just say, everyone stop, I'm going to go to this cool remote location with a helicopter. It's not like that. It's like the tour bus leaves at 9. Tour buses, by the way, are designed to leave in the worst light and come back right after the good light. It's designed to where you never get a shot in pretty light. So this is the one day we could go to the Great Wall, and you have to go the day it goes, and it rained all the way there, and it was foggy and awful, and so, but you got to deal with it. You can. Now, I waited until there were not that many tourists in this area, but there were just enough to kill the shot. So take a look. We have a group here. Well, I'll make it bigger. You have a group here that kills the shot. This poor lonely person. And then, of course, this woman. Now, she's in this shot because I waited absolutely forever. Like, she came down here and she stopped, and you're waiting up there, and you're like, come on, keep walking, keep walking, and then she's over here, and then she starts going back up the hill, no, 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 and then she goes, and she stops in here for like 10 minutes, and she starts going up here, and she goes back and goes forward, and finally said, I'm just gonna take it, and I don't care, because like, literally, my wife's like, honey, the bus is leaving. So here's what we've got. What you're gonna do is we're gonna take this shot and drag it on top of the other shot. So the only thing you have to do is take one shot, wait a minute or two, and take another, because people will move. You don't need them to leave the scene, but you need them to move. Just to any other area on the Great Wall wherever you're shooting. I'm gonna hold the shift key and drag it on top, and you can see they don't line up at all, okay? But you're gonna select both of them here in the Layers palette. They're both selected. We're gonna go under the Edit menu and choose Auto Align Layers. In a second or two, just click OK. It'll align them. You'll have a couple of gaps and stuff, and you have an unfortunate foot thing here. She's mostly gone, but there's a telltale sign there might have been somebody there. You know, if only there were a program that let us get rid of that foot. Anyway, here's what you're going to do. Go to the top layer and click the layer mask icon, all right? And go to these poor people over here on the Great Wall. What you're going to do is this. Get the brush tool, make it a little bigger than they are. If it's in white, you're painting in black, right? And just go, goodbye, goodbye. What happened was they moved to someplace else on the wall. So when I paint, it's showing the other picture underneath where they had walked away. So you go up here and you go, see ya, and they're gone. But you do have the mystery foot. So we'll just flatten that, all right? And then I would do the same trick that I've been showing you again and again today, which is to option click on a line, move up forward, and just get rid of it. Like that. And same thing over here. You can see a very obvious line there. Get rid of that. Over here, I would do the same thing. I would just copy this over. You could try content aware if you want, but it's almost, this is just so quick to put in another. Just click on a brick, on a piece of white. So I always try to click on a line. That way when you move it, you can see a line. See, there's a line inside there. I can go to another piece of brick and just hit right on the line and then paint it in. And that looks like but you know what I mean. All right, so you have to fix this or crop it. Honestly, I'd probably crop it that little bit. But that way, you wind up with shots of all kinds of temples and different stuff with nobody there when there's lots of people there. I did one in Versailles, in the Palace of Mirrors, where there's 30 people there. And I literally I took a shot and I would stand there. I would hold the lens up and just wait and wait and wait, and there was a couple that wouldn't move, and finally I actually had a friend get in there and say, could you guys move just to the left? And they moved. And anyway, I got 3 or 4 shots. I was able to get the entire hall with not a single person in it. But while I was standing there, there's probably 30 people in there. But as long as they move, you can do this masking technique, one on top of another, and just keep erasing people until everybody's gone in the whole image.
You can use more than 2?
Yeah, but you have to do it later. You can lose. I had to use like 4 or 5. You can do more, but every time you get to one, you have to make the picture visible again, erase those people, move to the next one. It's a process. How much time do we have left? 6 minutes? Okay. I think we can accomplish a lot in 6 minutes. Oh, one I want to show you, this is kind of important. I'll just focus on the most important ones. There is a contrast technique that I do that I think is very important. And it is, I'll show you this guy, because I don't know if you remember him from the slideshow, but so here's what we're going to do. We're going to add a lot of contrast to him. And we're going to do this using just a high contrast technique. The technique is this. It's a number of different layers. It's very, very easy to do. Now, I got to be honest with you. I'm going to show you the technique to do it in Photoshop where it costs no money. You can just do it. However, you can buy plugins that do it. Nick Software's Color Effects Pro, On One Software's Photo Effects, Topaz makes them. So there's lots of programs that do tonal contrast. I'm going to show you how to do it in Photoshop. Duplicate the layer. Then you're going to choose a mode we never get to use, Vivid Light, which looks terrible. We're going to make it look worse. We're going to press Command-I to invert it. So you'll wind up with just this big gray mess. We're going to turn this gray mess into the thing that makes the contrast. We do that, believe it or not, using the slowest filter in Photoshop. Filter, blur, surface blur. The nice thing is we enter the same numbers every time. We enter 40 and 40. So 40 for radius, 40 for threshold, click OK, and you can see what it does. It kind of makes a lot of detail. Now, we need to put a layer on top of this. I want it to look like we flattened the image, but without flattening it. You go Shift, Option, Command, E on Mac, Shift, Alt, Control, E. It's called a merged layer. Once you've done that, you don't need the middle layer anymore. And there's one more thing you don't need. You don't need the color that's in here, all these goofy, like psychedelic colors. Just remove those. Image, Adjustments, and Desaturate. Now, to get the contrast into this photo, all you do is change the blend mode from normal to overlay. That's a contrast mode, right? And you get tons of contrast. Now, if you're thinking, is it that much contrast? Watch the difference before and after. So, tremendous amount of difference. Here's the problem with this. I can tell you one thing about not just this, but plugins and stuff in general. They look terrible on shallow depth of field backgrounds. It's a dead giveaway that you did it. So what I do is this. I option click to hide that effect. So all the contrast is hidden behind this black mask. It's still there, the layer's still there, you just can't see it. If it's in black, you paint in white, and then I just paint over the foreground object. That way the background looks real. It doesn't look any different, but look at the contrast you bring in on him. So you bring out all this extra detail, all this extra stuff, just on him. That way the background doesn't look weird, doesn't look fake, doesn't look crazy. I did spill over a little bit, but you get the idea. So I do this a number of times. If I'm in any particular shot and I see an area that, wow, this would look great. Like for example, when I was doing that, the blue mosque earlier, I would have gone to each of there was the gold on top of each minaret. I would have done this effect on the minarets. It looks really nice on things that you want to bring contrast out on. All right, we have 3 minutes left. I can only choose one thing, even though I had 3 pages outlined. Hold on. We did that. We did that. Oh, that's good. Oh, that's good. All right, I'm going to give you 1.5. They probably will be okay with that. Okay. So, one is, and this is very popular, and I do it for landscapes, but I love it for travel. So what this is it adds kind of a dreamy effect to your photo. This is just a regular old photo as it is, came out of the camera. And in fact, the white balance is as shot, so it looks blue, right? It's kind of a bluish look, but I like it. It was a mistake. I walked in the shade. I should have changed my white balance right to shade, because that just makes too much sense, but I'm lazy, so I left it out of white balance. Normally I'd fix it, but I like this looks okay. But to get the dreamy effect, which I love, because I think it can be so effective with the right photo, it's so easy. Duplicate the layer. Step 1. Step 2, we're going to go and add a Gaussian blur. So under the filter menu, under blur, Gaussian blur, we're going to add like a 30 pixel blur. Look how dreamy that is. Now, here's what you're going to do. You have 2 choices. Number 1 is just to simply lower the opacity to like 35%. And it takes on that dreamy look that you see right there. So look at the difference. Regular, and then it gets this little dreamy kind of glow look that looks so nice on pictures. And I always have people ask me, how is it that your pictures look sharp but they look soft at the same time? That's because I add this little dreamy look. It works great on HDR images, because you know HDR images can be so The other thing you can do is change the blend mode to soft light. That way it adds a little contrast, and when you do that, you can run it all the way up to like 50%. And look, so it adds a little glow, a little softness on everything. I'll show you another picture where I did it on from a different vacation. This one, where it's just everything's a little bit harsh. Also, look how bright that stuff is back there, right? Really, really bright. Go to highlights and pull it back. Watch it. Look in that corner. Look up there. Watch. See how it clamps that down? So it was too bright, and it just kind of balances everything out. I love that highlight slider. So much better in Lightroom 4 and Photoshop 6. All right, now we're going to duplicate the layer, right? Add the big Gaussian blur, and either go to soft light and lower it to 50% to get that dreaminess, or just leave it to normal and lower it to 35%. And it just gives a very nice dreamy quality to it, right? You can see it better, bigger. And I do that a lot too, and it just adds that, takes the edge off a lot of different things. I'm going to show you one more. I'm not supposed to, but I'm going to. And this is another, oh, I got to show you 2. They're so fast though, it's okay. This one's how to make any image look like fall. So this is taken last week. First off, look at the highlights. Anytime there's something so bright, I just grab the highlights and drag them to the left. Watch those areas. Look at that. Look how it pulls it back, right? Here's before, and there's after, all right? So let's just open it up. Now, 2 couples is death to a photo, because, you know, they're going to start fighting. So step 1 would be to get rid of her and him. Just use the spot healing brush. It'll take you a minute, you know, but, you know how to remove people, right? That's pretty close. And then you'll use the, you know, the rubber stamp tool to get rid of the rest of the body. Okay. Now, but that's not the trick. The trick is how to make it fall. Here's a great trick. I do this for like landscape photos. It works wonderfully well. You're going to switch the mode from regular RGB color to LAB color, lab mode. When you do it, nothing happens. It's like, wow, I did it, nothing happened. But the trick is this. You're going to go then to Image, Apply Image. Inside of there, you're going to use soft light, that's fine, or overlay, either one. Overlays, watch, remember what I said? Soft light adds some contrast, overlay adds more. You're going to choose not the LAB channel, you're going to choose the B channel, and it's fall. It just does a great job of bringing out fall color like you can't believe. I'll go back to soft light to make it more realistic. There we go. But look at the difference. It just brings fall and love in the air. All right, now's the last one. We actually are 1 minute over. Don't tell anyone. All right, but this will be so quick that no one will even know or care. Okay. Lastly, is this has become very, very popular, which is to, I don't want to crop this photo, let's take off the crop. It's become very popular. Let me just reset it. Oh, it's got a crop on it, that's why. Let's go to clear crop. Okay. To go buy a texture, so go to iStock Photo or Photolio, wherever you want to go, spend $5 and buy a paper texture. Then all you have to do is open the paper texture and drag it on top of whatever photo you want. Now what's nice about this, if it's not the right size, it doesn't matter. It's just a texture. You can drag it and stretch it. It's okay. Normally you would never do that, right? You wouldn't just grab a photo, let's just stretch it. You know, it'll look terrible. But with a paper texture, it's fine. Then all you have to do is choose a blend mode that looks good. Try multiply, and it blends it into the photo to get these older looks, and then just use the opacity to get it where you want it. Here, I'll show you another one real quick, since it's like a 30-second effect. Open the image, grab a paper texture. Oh, look, here's one now. Select all and copy it onto your image, or however you want to get it over there. Stretch it to fit. Stretch it to fit. And go to soft light mode. Or actually, try multiply or overlay. There's overlay. They all look different. You can choose any one you want. Here's multiply. Ah, that looks good. And then just lower the opacity to get this kind of old look to it. Old world look. Now, I know that we're officially out of time, but I have something for you because you came all the way down here and you could have watched this on YouTube tomorrow. So, but this is, what I'm going to give you is not for you people watching at home. Where's the camera? Is that one over there? This is not for you folks at home. You should have come to New York with these awesome, awesome people that are here today. You should have been here. It's incredible. Okay. Plus, we're all going to go shopping and spend insane amounts of money and probably shoplift a little, but not that much while we're here. So here's what I have for you. So I did a class on Kelby Training. So I run this thing called Kelby Training. It is an online photography training thing with hundreds of classes from people like Joe McNally and Moose Peterson, somebody big, and you can think of their name and they're probably on there. So I did a class on travel photography. I actually filmed the travel photography part in Paris. So not last week, but back in April. And so the first part, it's an hour and a half, is just on the travel photography itself. Then I did 3.5 hours of just post-processing it. And we did everything from HDRs to panos to all kinds of stuff. Of course, we didn't get to cover in this hour because the whole thing is 5.5 hours long. I have a pass for you to watch that class. So it's a free number. You put a code in. Now, it is a code to watch anything you want for 24 hours. I'm hoping that you have an interest in travel photography because you came here today. I hope you'll watch that. Also, I also spent a week with Jay Maisel, who is a living legend of photography. Spent a week with him in Paris as well, and we did 2 classes with him here in New York City where he lives. And he is absolutely brilliant. So I hope you'll check out those 2 classes. But I have one for everybody here. So before you go, and the camera's off and all, come up here and grab one of these. But yeah, you can pass them out, sure. That way everyone gets one. There you go. But now I know that the moment the lights come on, you're all out of here like you're on fire. First, my humble thanks to B&H for letting me to come here and teach you guys today. Thank you guys very much. Number 2 is thank you guys for coming down. I know how busy everybody is, that you took the time to come down here and pack the house out like this. I was thrilled to turn out and thrilled that you came and spent the day with me. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
For more information, please visit us online, give us a call, or stop by our New York City Superstore. You can also connect with us on the web.